Well, I think it's time we relook at the Toyota Tundra with its 3.4 liter twin turbocharged V6 because there is some tough news that dropped indicating that these engines could fail at any time. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Alex, and well, last time we tried to talk about issues with this 3.4 liter twin turbocharged engine. It went south very quickly. My own fault, I had the wrong information, but today is a new day, and well, with the bombshell information that dropped on May 30th, I figured it's time we make this video and talk about the recall these engines are having. With that being said, I do still want to talk about the turbo issues with the 2022 trucks, so let's start off there. The first issue associated with this engine, and has been relatively highly discussed, is the electronic turbo wastegate actuators failing. We don't know if it's the actuators themselves or software related to them. Either way, the earlier models, especially the 2022s, have been somewhat plagued by this issue. When these actuators fail, the truck will be put in a limp mode because, well, it's pretty critical to any turbo. If and when they fail, the truck is still going to be drivable, and so you won't need a tow. Apparently, this is a manufacturing problem, not a design problem, which is good news there, and Toyota has resolved the manufacturing issue. So going forward, we should not see any wastegate failures. However, since the wastegates are integrated with the whole turbo has to be replaced. And on this engine, the turbos are stuffed back there, and I guess the only way to really access them and replace them is that the cab kind of has to be removed from the truck so you can gain access. So it is not going to be a very quick repair. It's going to be a very time-consuming repair. Now, despite this repair being covered under warranty and costing you nothing, it would still frustrate the heck out of me knowing that this whole cab would have to be removed. I mean, think about how many wiring harnesses are going to be disturbed, connectors being unplugged, how many things have to be unbolted, and the odds of everything going back exactly how they were when it left the factory floor is almost impossible. I mean, myself as a mechanic, it's as simple as putting a zip tie in the wrong location, and then next thing you know, that wiring harness is rubbing on something, and then you got electrical problems down the road. So it would just frustrate me knowing my new truck was all getting ripped apart to fix this issue. It seems this issue is contained with the 2022 model year trucks. If you got anything above that, 2023 and above, you should be okay. However, if you do have a 22 and your truck suddenly goes into limp mode, odds are you might have a turbo wastegate issue. The second issue that does concern me a little bit more is the reported engine failures. Apparently, some of these engines are having bottom end failures or spinning main bearings, and well, resulting in complete engine failure. And this does seem to be encompassing all of the third gen Tundras. We don't know exactly what's causing these engines, the main bearings, rod bearings, to fail. Toyota has been, I guess, keeping to themselves on this issue. And that brings us to today, because we do now know the reason why these engines were failing, the main bearing failures, and we understand why Toyota wanted to keep tight lips around this, because it is a pretty big issue. The official recall on our official Tundra here was dropped on May 30th, and it is 24TA07. I'll put a link down below in the description. You guys can check it out for yourselves. Basically, what this recall is saying is there is metal debris left in the engine from manufacturing processes, and this is resulting in main bearings being destroyed, taken out, resulting in more or less complete engine failure. Now, there's a couple things I want to dive into because I feel like this story is just starting and potentially far from over. But let's start with the basics. What the hell is a main bearing? These right here are main bearings out of a Detroit diesel engine, so much larger than what's going to be in your Tundras, but they serve the identical purpose. Basically, your crankshaft spins on these main bearings. Now, probably to the average person, these things don't look like what you would expect bearings to look like, but what the key to these things is that the crankshaft doesn't actually spin on these bearings themselves. There's a very, very thin layer of oil that separates the crankshaft to the main bearings, and the actual crankshaft more or less floats on a bed of oil. That is why oil pressure is so critical to an internal combustion engine, because if that oil is not there, your crankshaft then actually spins on these main bearings, and well, these things get hot really quick and can fail extremely quickly without proper oil here. So the last thing I wanted to point out about these main bearings are they're typically made of layers of softer metal. So you can kind of see on this engine, the crankshaft was starting to get into another layer there, which is, you know, not terrible. It's pretty typical for a used main bearing, but if you guys can see kind of this scrape right along here, this is a little piece of debris that got in between the crankshaft and the main bearing. And why there are layers of softer metal is that these can actually absorb debris, and we kind of see it right there with this scrape, and it protects the crankshaft. But when we start getting into bigger metal debris or metal flakes, which allegedly is what's happening with these Tundras, that very critical layer of oil between the crankshaft and this main bearing gets disrupted, and these things get very hot very quickly and they fail. As I mentioned, the metal debris is allegedly from the machining or the manufacturing process when making these engines in these Tundra trucks. And it's very unlike Toyota. Typically, when I think of Toyota, I think of a very well manufactured engine, which gives them, you know, all that reliability typically with a Toyota engine. First, we see the manufacturing issues with the turbos, and now we're seeing manufacturing issues with the engines themselves, which is, it's a tough look. So what is Toyota to do about this with their trucks? Well, we don't really know, and it seems like Toyota themselves don't actually know what they're going to be doing with this, because even in the recall it states they actually don't have a resolution just yet. Toyota will most likely have a solution here in the next couple weeks, at least you would expect that. But what they're doing so far with these engine failures is Toyota is shipping a short block to the dealerships, and the dealerships are rebuilding the engines. Now, a short block is basically the engine block and the rotating assembly, pistons, crankshaft, and the top end of the engine is being rebuilt and reused and reassembled on these trucks. If the engine on my own brand new Tundra truck here behind me was to poop out, let's say, I'd want a brand new engine put into the truck. I really wouldn't want my engine to be more or less rebuilt at the dealership and then put back into my brand new truck, which I just spent a heck of a lot of money on. I got nothing against the techs at Toyota or the dealerships themselves, but myself as a heavy duty mechanic having rebuilt engines, I know that when you rebuild an engine, you put components on benches, and at times they sit there for days. When you're working in an active shop like a normal dealership, you are gonna get dust and debris on those components, and it's extremely hard to ensure that all the componentry is clean when going back into the engine. And well, this whole recall is to do with what? Debris in the engine causing problems. So yes, Toyota is sending a short block, but this is a dual overhead cam setup engine. All your timing, camshafts are all up in the heads, which are going to be reused and reassembled. And so that componentry is going to be taken off the engine, put on a bench, and ideally covered. But again, you're working in an active dealership and you're just not gonna get that cleanliness or that proper fitment that you will at factory. Personally, I think it's a little bit cheap from Toyota. People have spent a ton of money on these brand new Tundra trucks, and metal has gone around the engine, so replace the engine and move on. The final nail in the coffin for me on these engine failures, this engine recall, is that Toyota allegedly knew about this issue since February of 2023. Not 2024, February of 2023, what, almost 16 months ago? And even on the recall, on the first page, you can see to February 2023. So they knew about this issue, yet they kept their mouth shut, and maybe we're just hoping to sweep this under the rug, hopefully only a couple engine failures, but I think it got to a point where they could no longer ignore the problem, and well, this is why we get this safety recall. So again, a pretty tough look, and they still don't have an official remedy for this problem with almost the 100,000 trucks that have been recalled. So allegedly, if your truck is built after February of 2023, you should be okay, but I don't want to get myself in trouble here. It does still seem that some 2024 engines are having main bearing failure problems. So this is why I think this story may just be beginning. It also seems like there are some engines that are made in Japan that are also failing, which are not manufactured in the US, which allegedly was the whole problem to begin with. So I think there is more to come. So they do have some tough sledding ahead of them. Lastly, the hybrid engines or the iForce Max engines are currently not in this recall, maybe they're assembled on different assembly lines, which is why they wouldn't have this debris in them. Who knows, but I'm sure there's gonna be more to come. This is a safety recall, and Toyota does state that, well, if there is complete engine failure on those hybrid trucks, they will still be able to move and get off the road and drive for a little bit. So that could also be why it's not included in the safety recall, because technically, if there is a complete engine failure, it is not unsafe to drive the vehicle. So maybe those engines are just as likely to fail, but it's not a safety concern, if that makes sense. So those are the two major issues with these Toyota Tundras and their 3.4 liter twin turbocharged engines. Unfortunately, with new engines, there are issues that will always arise, and well, it just happens that both of these issues are pretty large. The last thing I wanted to quickly talk about is just the complexity of this twin turbocharged engine. When looking at the predecessor, the 5.7, pretty simple V8, people loved it, it was reliable and had a pretty darn good track record. But this engine is pretty tightly wound up. As someone commented, it's a whiz bang of an engine. So I always say simplicity usually leads to reliability, and this new engine is pretty far from simple. Typically, I would give Toyota the benefit of the doubt because normally they do produce very, very quality engines. However, the quality control thus far on the third gen Toyota Tundras built out of Texas, unfortunately, has been extremely subpar. If you guys are looking for a Toyota Tundra, I would wait, pump those brakes. I'd wait at least 6 months, maybe a year for those 2025, maybe even 2026 models when all of this stuff has been completely ironed out. If you're in a dire need for a Toyota Tundra, go look at a 2012 to 2021 with the 5.7. You're not gonna be disappointed. They're very quality engines. And if you're desperate for a twin turbocharged truck, head across the road, get yourself an F-150 with a 3.5 liter EcoBoost. They're just as expensive, except they come with more power, they're more fuel efficient, and at this point, they're probably more reliable. Very, very interested in what you guys think. Issues arise in engines all the time. Like we say, no engine is perfect, but it seems like, at least in my opinion, the way Toyota has dealt with this issue so far just seems a little bit disappointing, especially given that these trucks, well, are not cheap, and the issue at hand is a very, very large one. So we'll have to see what Toyota comes up with in terms of a solution for this. But for now, at least in my opinion, it's a little bit disappointing. Let me know what you guys think. If you did like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And well, if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe because we'll be following this story pretty closely. I'm very, very interested to see what happens with these engines because as we know, Ram is releasing their inline-six twin turbocharged engine this year, and I can't help but see some similarities between both platforms. They only offer one engine, all their eggs in one basket, so it will be very interesting to see what happens with these engines. And anyways, enough of me. We'll see you in the next freaking video.